Here we are. Welcome to the season finale of Rogue Frequencies. I'm Olivia.
And I'm Matt.
And as you well know by now, we created this podcast to talk about punk music and culture, and not in the way that people always expect, because we are using it as a catalyst to learn more about individual and collective human growth and development. And today, things are a little bit different for us because we are closing out season 1. So in this episode, we'll look back on what we have talked about through this journey so far and share some of our biggest takeaways. And before we're done, we will share with you what you can expect in season 2. So let's get into it. Matt, what is your biggest takeaway from this experimental journey?
Well, I came to this project with like a lot of knowledge about and passion for punk rock music and musicians and various scenes and an appreciation for what punk has been for me. And through our conversations, our pre-production conversations that we had for almost a year before we started even really planning out the podcast, and then in developing outlines, a concept that you threw to me was this concept of I, you, and thou. And that got me really thinking about punk rock and the ethos of punk, and something that I'd always kind of been chewing on, but never really understood what it was that I was chewing on. And that was this like kind of idea of like punk rock is this very individualistic, I'm angry at the world, I'm angry at society, I have these conflict feelings, I. Yet at the same time, whenever you listen to, punk rockers talk about their scene or their journey or their process of, their band evolving or maybe getting signed or participation in a DIY style project, there's always this collective element to it. And I never really knew what to make of this reality, which in our culture, we put the I at the center of everything. Right? There's a staunch individualism that is at the core of the American cultural experience and project. And yet at the same time, we talk about this idea of like a society and the I, you, thou concept made a lot of sense to me after we started talking. At first, I didn't know what to make of it. I'll be honest.
I remember that.
Yeah, it took me a while. Yeah, the wheels were turning on that one. But I think where I came to it, what helped me understand it was, another thing that I'm passionate about, which is the labor movement and our commitments to each other and to ourselves there, and how, if we're going to create some sort of generative change, that we have to do it within ourselves, within others, and within the broader group. And that can't all happen simultaneously. And it's not going to happen without a concerted effort. And so I've really appreciated and enjoyed seeing this concept in application through the various punk rockers and punk scenes, and the different ways it manifests itself in a real world sort of less theoretical, but more applicable sort of manner. I think about like our Rancid Clash episode that we did, and that commitment that members of those bands have to themselves and to each other. And then how that, like for someone like myself, when we talked about like Rancid in particular, what that meant for me. And I thought that was a really clear, like I, you, thou, through the experiences of Tim Armstrong, Matt Freeman, the band, the scene in the East Bay, and then eventually all the Rancid punks who get on board and find themselves learning and growing and committing to whatever it is in themselves they want to commit to, and how that doesn't happen without all of those elements coming together. And that happened because of intentionality. So this has been a really good exposure to an idea that increasingly is at the forefront of my mind on a daily basis.
Yeah, I remember when we were marker boarding. So as you mentioned, we had Zoom dialogue for almost a year, I think like twice a month,
Yeah.
where we were, what do we want to talk about here? There's something that, as we talked about in the NoFX episode, that I felt from being at that final tour concert, and I just wasn't sure what it was yet. It was just like this, I don't want to say it was a seed because it was energetic. And I just felt this thing, and then we're like, well, let's just talk and see what we come to. And then we had talked for a while, and then we got together in my co-working space, and we're marker boarding, and oh, we talked about this, and that could go with that, and this could be this, and what does it mean? And as we started to lay it out, this I saw this vision of I, you, thou, and how it happened through what we were planning for the episodes. And I saw you get like excited and inquisitive at the same time. Like, I think I know what this is, but it's kind of mysterious. And then as we started recording the podcast, it really started to live for you. And so to help the listening audience sort of understand what we mean by this I, you, thou, it's sort of, you can sort of think of it as developmental. That's one way to think about it. Like, first I start the world when I'm born. It's me, right? I am born me. And I actually think I don't know, I as a human, none of us know when we're young, there's a difference between ourselves and someone else. When
Right.
we are young, our parents are us, we are our parents. What we are thinking, we believe they're thinking. What we are experiencing, we believe they're experiencing. And not just our parents, like any caregivers, our smaller, intimate community, family, neighborhood, whatever. As we get older, we start to recognize that there is a separation from I and you. What is in my head is in my head, not in your head. What I am feeling is my feeling, not your feeling. And you begin to understand and separate that I am a person and you are a person. And as we grow, we build community of I and you together, becoming the thou, that we are a collective. Now, what can happen is, I think some of what you were sort of talking about here of there can be an I versus you, which prevents the thou, the greater
Right.
good.
Yeah, I think when I hear you say that, like immediately my mind went to Scott Sturgeon and what we talked about with crackcore, right? And that inability to reconcile the two elements, the I and the you, and therefore there's no thou, versus what we talked about in New York hardcore, which was a pure reconciliation of the I and the you, creating this very intense thou sort of experience for people within that scene, that was so foundational to, the formation of punk as we know it now.
Yeah, and there is there is healthy conflict, for lack of a better way to say it. In a thou, we have healthy conflict. In an I versus you, we have more destructive conflict.
So it's almost like the difference between like accountability versus like aggression.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a way to think about it that I hadn't really thought about before. Yeah, are we accountable to moving forward together for a greater purpose, a greater good, or are we just fucking shit up to fuck shit up and tear it down?
Right. 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 Like, I mean, you brought this up in our pre-conversations and you've come back to it multiple times, that idea of like you're Johnny Ramone. Right? You need somebody who's going to hold you together, who sees the project, who sees the goals of the band and is committed to themselves, the bandmates and the band and where the band is going in a way that's not, like you said, just going to break things. We're not here to just break things.
Yeah, and we've talked about this in the Ramones episode, where the Ramones thought they had a goal. They did have a goal. They didn't think they
Right.
had it. They had a goal, which is to create a number one hit song. And that was the greater purpose. So when they were in conflict, when they were not a collegial brotherhood on a personal level, they were a collective brotherhood for this united goal. Band members came and went, and they united into this ethos, this goal, because the culture was so clear, the goal was so clear. And what ended up happening was not what they were aiming for, but probably, and we talked about this then, what I would say is even more important, which was creating this whole genre that maybe saved your life,
Yeah.
at least helped you find your identity, and created community, uh, and eventually this podcast, which is probably the most important part of all of everything
Well,
punk
this is
created.
what they had in mind. Yeah,
Yeah,
at
they were
CBGB, they're
they were
like, "This is
planning
what we're cooking." Yeah.
this. So they by having this goal, they may not have hit the specific goal that they had. They achieved far beyond that, I would posit, and I think you agree. Uh, and the we don't have to kumbaya and all love one another to be committed to the thou.
Yeah.
And we actually need conflict for a true thou. I think of Lencioni's book, The Five Dysfunctions of a Team, and then he has subsequent books that follow that same theme. The Ideal Team Player, there's a workbook with it. Anyway, the idea being that there are essentially five caricature traits, five, um, there's another word I want, but I can't get it right now. So we'll just say traits of a productive team. And one of the very first one is trust. It kind of seems like a no-brainer, but authentic trust. And it doesn't mean you just hit this highest echelon of trust and you stay there. It's actually the process of continuing to build and rebuild trust.
Yeah.
And it's a commitment to having conflict. He doesn't call it necessarily healthy conflict, but I think of it that way because it's the thou. The
Right.
team is the thou, and you have to have conflict for the team to continue to separate a little bit and reform. So one way to think about it is a broken bone. No one wants to break a bone. Doesn't feel good. I've only broke one. It was my pinky toe. It was awful. Um, but nobody wants that.
No,
But when
it's
you
horrible.
It's horrible. And when you break a bone, the incredible part about it is that the bone heals itself in that spot stronger than it was before. It overly calcifies and it makes sure that that particular spot will never break again.
Hmm.
So it's the same thing with teams. They have to have conflict and like have that discomfort, that separation, that repellent a little bit. When we're in conflict, we feel that repellent energy. But then it's the coming back together that makes you stronger than before. And the more you can have those experiences, the stronger the thou gets, the stronger the community gets. That's what really we were talking about. We didn't talk about it as directly in the Ramones, but we talked about it very, very clearly with Rancid is
Right. Yeah.
brotherhood, the
Yeah.
siblinghood. And I know that that's such an important part for you of what allowed you to see yourself in punk culture and return to it is this, I got you and
Yeah.
you me community.
Totally. Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah. Even listening to you talk, I was just kind of rehashing like in my head like the song lyrics and core of the song Salvation, a Rancid song where Tim talks about this and had that life experience and him and Matt Freeman and everything else. Like, yeah, that makes, I mean, like I said, this has been one of the big takeaways for me from this podcast is a really strong appreciation for this concept and what it means in your daily life and what it's meant for this genre of music and attitude in life that is punk rock. It makes a lot of sense. It really does.
And as we've been talking about this, and you mentioned the labor movement, I just come back to that for a moment. I mean, labor movement is very punk.
Yeah.
And I think about your commitment to the labor movement, and I think about how there are continued fracture in that. So even when I think about your work as as union organizing and union leadership, where sometimes you might be at odds with administration for
Hmm.
the greater good, and they might be at odds with you, and it doesn't mean, you know, I'm gonna do something destructive to the man or, I am, lashing out as you, an individual administrator or collective, but it's more like we have to have this healthy conflict to keep our system in check and healthy for all parties.
Totally. Totally. Yeah. No, that's yeah, again, I think hopefully listeners walk away from this season and can sort of see because, like you said, this became kind of like the spine of what we put together, um, and really kind of created a connection between various genres and concepts and ideas within the punk movement. And listening to you talk about this, I'm struck by the fact that like one of the things that I know when we first started this project was like you had your connection to punk rock but like the deep dive appreciation to like what it is and what it has been wasn't really there. And just listening to you talk now, like so effortlessly through this, leads me to wonder, like, what's your big takeaway? And I think I know what it might be overall.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, as you were saying that, I was thinking about our earliest episodes where I would sit and listen for 30, 45 minutes of you just, like, spinning the history and telling me, and I was so engaged, I was so drawn in to the history of whatever topic we wanted to talk about that day, and I felt a bit like maybe how some of your students feel in class, like, sitting there just listening to Matt, like, just riff and, like, just spill it all. And yeah, I definitely have this newfound appreciation of history. And so as you and I have talked about, I think mostly off mic, but we've talked about how I am such a futurist. I live it I have done a lot of work to live in the present, but unchecked, I will live in the future.
It's
And
a
I
good
don't
way
mean
to be, it's it's very Jetsony of you.
I was gonna say, I don't mean in the Jetsons way of the spaceships flying around, but life can be better in the future than it is today. And one of my core values is this idea that I have a purpose of helping to make the world a better place wherever I am, whatever it is I'm doing, how am I contributing to the growth of society? And that might be small influences within my family and my social networks, and it might be bigger influences like running government programs, early childhood programs, now in coaching. How am I helping be part of the answer of the future being better than today? One of the things I've struggled with in the past is like the past already happened. Like it wasn't better then
Right.
necessarily. And people who are nostalgic for the past, I've never really understood like, oh, back in whatever, things were better. And I'm like, I don't believe you.
Th
It
there
doesn't
there's a reason a lot of, very authoritarian, right sort of political movements and people look backwards, right? And they create a past that wasn't there because, it's easier to try to, in your mind, think about like, well, things were better then than they are now, what I'm experiencing. But it's never been lost on me that like the people who want to be as socially destructive as possible look backwards, not forwards.
Yeah, that's a really astute point there. And I I think that this piece of revisionist history is the part that makes me crazy. Is like it's like that past is not this rose-colored glasses thing that you're saying it is, and so I also am just wired to be very future-oriented, and so I can get really rejection-y of the past, and what I've really super appreciated here is being able to get pulled into the awe and wonder, and much of that was off mic here when we were doing our pre-work, but the awe and wonder of the authentic lessons of the past that you and I could choose to highlight. And so by hearing the past, I mean, I have them recorded, so maybe we'll release pieces of them at some point, who knows? But
Ooh, there you go, little mini-sodes.
there we go. Yeah, the lost tapes, the lost Zooms.
Yeah, the demos, it's the demo mix.
Yeah, but I the transcripts of those, I would go back and look at them before, some of our recordings, and I would see, I mean, this is rare for me. There would be 10, 15, 20 minutes at a time where I didn't speak, just in awe of what you were sharing about the history, and at the same time being really engaged with, how do I see this coming together with this work that I do in coaching and this geeky side of me that I have to kind of want to untangle people and brains and motivation and where we get stuck and where we get unstuck, etc. And the history became this incredible catalyst for the future in a way that I haven't had a felt sense of before. I knew that you can go back in history to create future, but I hadn't really lived it, experienced, felt the energetic possibility of that until this project. So it's been mad cool for me.
Yeah, yeah, it's been fun listening to you engage with the material and the history and so seamlessly start to just jump through it in a way that like, drives the conversation forward. Because like you said, when we first started talking, it was definitely turn talking with a lot of this sort of stuff. It's been really cool, just to hear you, take command of all these different bands and all the different things that were going on, and then synthesize it with the coaching element. I think
Yeah.
that's something I've been really excited about, just like listening.
Yeah. I think we're both saying here that we're emerging greater than the sum of our parts.
Totally, totally.
And that's what thou is, to loop back to that. That's what community is. It's very so social constructivist theorists. So here we go, educational psychology. But it's the folks, Piaget, Lev Vygotsky, Eric Erikson, all these old white dudes. But they sort of had this theory of it's not just the learning that I can do by myself, by socially constructive learning, by constructing learning in a social experience, we are more than the sum of our parts. We're exponential. And what's really cool about right now is the learning theory that is emerging now is generative learning theory. So it's social constructivist plus you add in technology, tools, etc. And what we can generate of collective learning can become so much more than any one of us. And I felt that come to life here. I mean, you would say, check out this book, check out this podcast, check out this YouTube video, this movie. And I could see us doing this generative learning process where we're sharing and learning with and from each other. And we're using these outside tools and resources. And yeah, I feel like both I can have a somewhat articulate and informed conversation about the history of punk music, and we've only just scratched the surface
Yeah.
here. And going to shows does have a new I have a newer appreciation for what I'm witnessing and what I'm a part of and what I'm experiencing, and the music does elevate.
Yeah, totally. Right. Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting too, because like one of the things that I think most people, the layperson, when they look at punk, all they see is destruction. All they see is chaos. All they see is the sides of punk that are antisocial in nature, and clearly, punk musicians, punks in general, play that up. Right, you don't wear an anarchy sign, because you want to have like a singular government where everybody gets together, a singular society where everybody's happy and all that sort of stuff, right? Um, but I think when you learn about the history, when you learn about the relationships that people form within the scene, you see that like what punks are trying to create with their music, with the attitude, with all the elements of being in this broader movement. I think it's fair to call it a movement. Is that like the idea is we're going to take something apart and then we're going to put something in its place that's going to be better, right? And I think like again, my mind goes to those historical analogs, those things that have laid down in the past, right? You said you're a futurist. I'm definitely someone who looks backwards as an immediate tendency, but to stuff like Mikhail Bukharin, and we talked a lot about some of those early political philosophers from the 19th century and 18th century when we were doing our initial conversations. And at the core of like Bukharin's work, or even like a Rousseau, was this idea that like you're going to reform society in a way that collectivizes people for the better, or at least puts people and their needs at the forefront of whatever it is that you're doing. And so like I've always felt about punk was this idea of like, yeah, it's a rejection of elements of the world that are destructive, but then in like concert with that rejection is this idea of like we're going to build something better. And I've always thought that like the build something better has always been smaller It's not like a mass, like this is what the United States or the world or whatever it's going to be is. It's kind of, and I came across a lot of this when I was reading Penny Rimbaud from Crass. Um, this idea of like, well, we can just make this the here and now, this place that I am, wherever my feet are, this is where I can make things better. And I think that like for people to hear about that with punk and to understand that like, you take the past, you take the present and you add those things together to get to the future is such a like element of punk that's missing from most people and what they imagine this movement to be.
Yeah, I think that that's a really important point of and we've something we've talked about in episodes and throughout, and even when we haven't talked about it directly, it's always been in an undertone of destruction, construction cycle, and destruction for destruction in and of itself is dangerous.
Right.
Destruction for construction, even if you don't know what will be constructed, is the productive element of this. And as you were speaking, I was actually thinking about gardening. So I am a vegetable gardener. I believe you are too.
Yep.
Uh-huh.
Get in the dirt. You got to get
Gotta
out
get
there,
the dirt,
touch
gotta
grass.
touch grass, yep. And in the fall, I'm always sitting with a couple of different emotions that fall into that sort of bittersweet category of, like, taking out the plants that are dying from the frost and that aren't gonna produce anymore and feeling a little sad that the season's over. Also feeling a little happy that there's a little less work to do for a little bit of
Yes.
time, and some gratitude for both the produce, but also the production that I could be a part of, my hands being a part of producing something. And that is sort of like you know, uh, the construction destruction cycle happening. And another thing we've talked about in this podcast that starts to shade in here are the juxtapositions, the
Yeah, we talk a lot about
dichotomies.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that the construction and the destruction, they're dichotomies, right? The Scott Sturgeons of it all sort of lead to some of the other productive pieces, or even the neo-Nazi fascism pieces, and or the toxic masculinity and the dangers to women leading to feminist punk and empowerment. Like these dichotomies you have to have them. It can't all be kumbaya. That again, it goes back to that healthy discourse, healthy conflict. Um, and yeah, it's just been really cool to see how even conversations we were coming into that we thought had different sort of lessons that we were trying to highlight every time we came back to these concepts.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, you know, y- spending 20 plus years of my life in this scene, some of this conversation was the first time I thought deliberatively about what's going on in the scene and what's going on with the music and what it means to me. And, taking it and talking to acquaintances or friends and people who have also been in the scene, people who spent more time deeper in the scene than I had been in, and hearing their musings and thoughts and ideas about what punk rock is as well. And just this idea at the end of it, all these conversations that we've had is that like through punk, you are empowered, right? You have this ability to do something more. And I get back to this idea of like, how does society perceive punk rock versus how do people within the punk rock scene perceive punk rock? And again, noting that there's always going to be bad actors and there's always going to be unsavory elements. Um, the idea of being empowered is at the core, right? And I think a lot about, I have students this year, probably more so than I've had in a long time, definitely owing to the nature of our politics and our society in 2025, who are overtly wearing, DIY punk rock clothing with like crossed out swastikas and political messages about, whether it's ICE or it's about the affordability of living in society. And it's not just one kid here or one kid there. It's something that's a whole lot more. And I bring all this up because one, like they're clearly deriving something from punk rock that they feel that they can then present out to the world confidently. But also it's, wearing clothing like that, wearing the attitude out on your sleeve like that is also putting up a flag. Like, hey, I'm over here. Who's gonna join me? Right. And sometimes um there's this whole idea of like, well, movements need leaders. And it's sometimes like, well, we also need followers. We need people who are going to work together with each other. And something as simple as wearing a message on your shirt that you scrawled out in, a Sharpie the night before, and then you cut up and then you safety pin back together real quick. And now you've got your message for the day. And then someone else sees you in this hallway and they give you that knowing look or whatever. That creates something, right? And it creates a sense of belonging and being for the individual person, but then it also creates the ability for those individual people to feel like, like, well, change is possible. Something is possible here that we didn't think of. And I think it gets back to this idea of like, we have lost our sense of being historical actors in society. Like we look at the past and think like, well, those people did stuff. And then we look to the future and so many of us think like, who's going to be the people who are going to do this stuff in the future? And it's like, well, you've skipped over the present. Right. The present, the future is now, right? You build it. Like you said, you're a futurist because you think about like what is possible. And I think punk provides that place for a lot of people to think about what is possible in this moment, right? You look at something that you don't like, you empower yourself to think about what you do like, and then you take that action step and you go do it.
Yeah, which is what brought us here.
Right.
We
Yeah.
thought about what we do like a lot, and then, it was and how we weren't saying, "How do we change the world?" But we're saying, "How do we influence with something we love?" And that is the essence of how we got here. There is something unsavory about this time that we are living in. There is adversity, and we are choosing to use it as a breeding ground. We are choosing to use it as our own small way of being empowered to make a difference. And we see this happening with the students in your class and No King's protest, which showed up, it happened on a day when we were potting, and all of these things. You're so right that the future is now, and it is happening. It's not just tomorrow. Maybe some stages are being built, but some people are performing on stages that currently exist.
Right.
That's happening.
Right. And I think that's where, as we start moving towards the end of the episode here, like that's the part that was lost in the, like, when people want to go back and like, as you were saying, like this idea of like the future is now and everything else. In my mind, I can hear the Sex Pistols like, no future. Right. And I think the difference here is that like, when they're singing those lyrics, when Johnny Rotten is screaming no future, there's lost is this idea of like, well, he's saying that like if we stay on this path, there's no future. Like there's a possible other pathway. There's an infinite number of other pathways if we choose to do the work to get to those pathways. Like we're not on rails, we're walking. And right, you can change the direction you can walk. And I think that's one of the most underappreciated elements of punk rock is that there is a sense of possible in punk rock. It's at the core, it's always been there. And just because someone screams no future or sings about destruction doesn't mean that they don't want a future. It doesn't mean that they don't want something to live with and within.
And I'll meet that with Kathleen Hanna.
Oh,
We want revolution, girl style now,
there you go.
right? So we've got it coming from different places. And in some senses, there is no future. There is only the present, and you can look back on the past. And how do you influence the future? It's the empowerment of today.
Totally.
So let's talk about the future.
Let's do it. I was just going to ask you what's in our future.
What's in our
You've got the
future?
magic 8 ball.
Yes. So next season, we are excited to be having some interviews with punks, performers, the people in the pit, the people making art. Maybe we'll even see some of the poster creators and such, people that affiliate themselves in the punk world, and how that has been their through line in their growth up to where they are at the point of discussion. We'll probably show up with some episodes discussing other bands, genres, experiences that we might have in the world engaging as active real-life punks today. And we hope that we hear from our listeners, our friends, our family, and future friends that we don't know listening that will engage in discussion with us and bring perspectives, questions, thoughts that can continue to inform this discussion. We are creating the thou here. We are creating community here.
You're a pro. You're a pro now. You got it.
Get through one season and all of a sudden,
That's right. You start thinking it.
Sure. Off mic, I often describe myself as like semi-pro, but I think I just elevated.
I think you leveled up. I think you leveled up right there.
So we hope that you have learned something about yourself and other humans from this journey with us on season 1 of Rogue Frequencies. We cannot wait to talk with you more about life and punk in season 2. And I want to thank you, Matt, for joining me on this journey. I've learned so much, and I know I'm going to continue to learn so much, and it's just been a really fun time for me.
I really appreciate the invite, the initial conversation, and at the NoFX show about what this could be, and your thoughts and what this has become, and such a foundational element of almost the last 2 years of my life has been really cool to be a part of this project. I'm really excited to see where it goes now. So thank you for throwing out the opportunity to do something like this.
And thank you, listeners, for joining us on this crazy adventure and for commenting and contributing to the community and engage and for being your empowered self, whatever that means for you today. And so, as always, as a gift for you, we have a Spotify playlist where we'll include a wide assortment of punk songs from bands we've covered and bands that we haven't, and maybe even bands that we will talk about in the future. So as you engage with us, let us know what bands, subgenres, people, punks you want us to talk about, and maybe you even want us to talk to you. So thanks for being here, everyone. We'll talk to you in season 2.
Bye.